Alright, day 2 of this video, which is called Sofa Chill. So where were we? I guess India tour. So once the India tour wrapped up, like I played 2 shows. I played one at Grace Park Audio and I played one show at this place called The Box. So the Box show was actually very cool because I got enough time to play through my set, and I also got enough time to interact and really address anybody's questions. Like there were around 50 or 60 odd people who attended. Most of them were family and friends, but they were really keen on trying to understand what first. The main thing that I think a lot of people were curious about was, what is this genre of music? Because there's not a lot of awareness in terms of where the sound is coming from, what elements does that constitute, and I think in a way progressive rock is very new, not a lot of people in the mainstream sort of side of things get exposed to progressive rock, because I think it's just not possible. I don't think progressive rock is played on radios. Most of the people who are into this kind of music have sort of come through offshoots of heavy metal. Heavy metal or heavy metal listeners really seem to translate extremely well into this progressive rock genre. So, but I guess those listeners are also in such a small niche that you can't really expect a lot of people to already know about this, because there's just not enough exposure. So a lot of people who did end up coming to my show came from this really extremely rudimentary background of a lack of knowledge. So a lot of questions were centered around that, which was extremely interesting, because I figured that most of them might have questions about guitar playing, but I guess there was not a lot of people who are playing guitar, but people who are just extremely new to this kind of music. So addressing those questions was a lot of fun. So it gave me a lot to think about in terms of how am I to present my material in the future. And the more I think of it, the less and less significant I find it. But of course, it does invite a lot of questions. So I guess at some point I will have to think about it very deeply. So the India tour wrapped up. I was back in Philly around the end of January, and I straight up started rehearsing for the upcoming recording. So I had already booked a studio, which is Triacle Mind Studios in Philly. I was scheduled to work with Michael Cumming, who's an incredibly amazing engineer, and that's his studio. So I had already booked it. The recording for this album, and this is just a simple, more exploratory jazz kind of vibe on this new album that I put out. And things happened really fast, but it was already sort of booked in November, but we had to postpone that date because we were just not there, and I hadn't put together a proper group of guys. So when I came back, I think I just stepped on the pedal a little bit in terms of that direction. Got a bunch of guys together, started rehearsing, and finished up the recording. So now that recording is getting mixed and mastered as we speak. So the album will be out soon, and I think it was very interesting to finally put myself in a studio setting and record with these bunch of people. They're all musicians, local musicians from Philadelphia. They've all sort of been doing this for quite some time, so working with them itself was an incredibly cool opportunity. And specifically in terms of guitar playing, I just really wanted to explore this side of mostly rhythm guitar playing and sticking to form and just approaching a record as to how a studio musician would approach a record. I think that level of proficiency that studio musicians have is something that I think everybody should strive for, not just guitar players. But I find myself more and more sort of inclined towards developing extremely good technique, something that I'll always have to show up for, and then wanting to work with different kinds of people and do different kinds of music. So having that ability to translate my guitar playing into multiple formats, I think, is very important in the long run. So, coming out of the progressive rock sort of space and writing that EP in the last like 3 or 4 years, I think personally, I think I took way too much time to write these 3 songs or 4 songs that are part of that EP. These 4 songs, I took like a rather simplistic approach in terms of the form. Now, the form of the song is just like A section, B section, and there's a lot of room for improvisation. So, there's a lot of solos that are happening. I also had an incredibly amazing feature. I also had another incredibly amazing guitar player feature on this record to play solos on 2 of these songs. He's a great friend of mine and he's a local guitar player from Philadelphia. His name is Dave Tucker. Definitely, follow his stuff because he's incredible. So he was kind enough to feature on those 2 records, and we did the whole recording in a day. We did 5 songs in 6 hours. It was extremely smooth. We did have a rehearsal on the day before, so that was just to get a bearing, and then we kind of left our instruments at the studio because then everything was set up, and the next day morning we just went in and sort of hashed those songs out. That experience was so like liberating and just so free, but just like having to stick to like an extremely tight sort of sound because we are doing live recording and we are like 5 of us playing together at all times. I think that taught me like a lot, and then like now that the sort of output of that, and so now that I listen to the album and I find like what was the output of like us doing or like making music in that format, because I had never done that before, I think probably for the next immediate future, I think that format is what I'm going to stick to while making music, because it's just incredible. It's like it's not a lot of pressure in terms of like having to do every single take like perfectly, but it relies more on the natural intuition that all musicians seem to have, and I really want that quality to like show more in the music. Like, I think that is very important for me personally. So involving people who can express themselves at that level is always going to yield like great results. So I think I'm going to stick with that approach for a while. Just writing few basic ideas and then I take it to a group of musicians. It may or may not be the same musicians in the future, but of course it gives me an opportunity to invite them and have them sort of like take their approach towards it. So in a more of an improvised context, and I think that's where my guitar playing is now also slowly moving towards, in terms of like I'm getting more and more into these improvised forms of music, and having form and having this loose arrangement. But of course, like when you play live, like it can go a few different places based on like the vibe that you feel in that moment. So doing this is of course not easy. Like it may look or it may sound like I'm going for a more like easier approach to making music, but I guess that kind of easy approach, or like a looser approach, or like an approach which has like less boundaries in terms of what can and cannot be played, to do that is extremely tough. Like it's probably the toughest thing to do, because you have to align on like certain choices, and only then can like the record itself sound as good as it does. So like that kind of decision making really intrigues me. So the more that I think about it, the more that I feel like, oh, now I really want my guitar playing to also show this idea of like contributing or like making songs that I have. So a lot of it is like now geared towards that. So I guess like so for this album, it will get mixed and mastered and it will get released. So once that is released, we also have an EP release show coming up in June, which is going to be at a friend of mine's rooftop. So So that's like a cool gig, like to have this vibe and this sort of jazz fusion, very like Yusuf Days, Tom Misch, Ben Jones, Charlie Allen, all the UK jazz people who have this sort of pocket jazz stuff and pocket jazz vibes that are going on. And that's kind of like, that's also, it forms the basis of like this Philly sound that I hear a lot around all the gigs that I attend in Philadelphia. So that itself has like sort of rubbed off on me a little bit, and I think this record is going to be really, really nice. Like there's like a few ideas that are out there, and like it's not like as bound to the intricacy of the material that sort of was in my previous work. So I'm kind of like very happy. I'm very happy about this record, and it comes out in like a few weeks. So I hope you guys also enjoy. All the links will be down below, and of course you know where to find it at this point. So now let's get into like more behind what is really happening behind the scenes while all of this is also happening. So in terms of like guitar practice and like sticking to a routine and to be able to do this, okay, fine, like I want to do all of this improvised like jazz or jazz fusion and anything that like something that is more like form based but also very loose around its arrangement. It does, as I mentioned, come with a lot of like proficiency about the instrument. So that has now become like an absolute like bare minimum that I need to have. So there's a lot of work that is involved in trying to develop this kind of ability. So to do that, as soon as I came back from India, I started taking lessons with Eric Sales. He is an incredibly amazing guitar player, and I'll link his credentials below. So what we're working on now is just to have like a more fundamental approach to like straight jazz stuff, like, you know, working on arpeggios, working on 2-5-1, working on shapes, working on just connecting those shapes, and working on playing through the changes. What is playing through changes? How do you sort of highlight those changes in your soloing approaches? So all of that, although like I hear a lot of jazz and my ear can recognize it, that kind of technical ability is something that I lack, because I've never approached that sound in that way. Like previously, or all the material that I have written for my previous album came from this very rudimentary understanding of like scales, and you know, most of the songs are diatonic. I rarely change key. So I think like these problems now became like very interesting to me. So to do that and to like have an answer to these problems, I think developing that kind of language or jazz specific vocabulary is like very important. So that's what I'm focusing on now. And just as a way to like track myself, like track my ability of like actually utilizing these skills, I've started uploading like my practice videos on YouTube. So you can find a playlist that is linked, and that's just like just this raw camera audio of me practicing and just like jamming out, like mostly just improvising on like a backing track. So it's very bare minimum effort like in terms of like YouTube videos, but I'm just doing it so that 1 year from now I'll be able to just understand like whether or not I have like progressed, or like has my sound changed, am I approaching these chord changes, am I getting it really, like, you know, that the sound that is in my head and I want my guitar to convey, is it happening, you know, in a more like fluent fashion? Like, am I speaking, am I drawing from that language? So attaining this technical proficiency is obviously going to take time, but I guess there's a lot of like shedding involved, and as an output of that, I think I can just try and improvise. Like a lot of these times in lessons, I get like incredibly worked up about like having to be proficient about these arpeggios and these shapes and everything that is like technical about it. But at some point, it is very important to like just gauge where whether or not you're able to apply whether or not you're able to apply this knowledge. So I'm constantly trying to check that, and that also just helps me, like if I really am not able to do it, then I must dive deeper into the basics, because it's still not like completely, like second nature. It hasn't seeped in deep enough to like to sort of just involuntarily come through and express itself in your playing. So that becomes very important. And I guess like focusing on that aspect a lot just like really makes you realize like guitar playing is incredibly technical, and the results are slow, but like if you're like patient enough and you really just do the work, then it shows up like maybe like 2 or like 3% better like each time. And you start to see that like you don't just uh, like you yourself start approaching other kinds of material like extremely relaxed. You're like, that doesn't bother you as much as something like improvising over chord changes does. So you do see progress. Like I definitely see like there's some sort of ways and like abilities in which I'm able to like think better in terms of like my previous material, because I'm just able to approach that with so much comfort and ease. And also because I have like just continuously practiced that material for almost a year now, so that has now seeped in deep enough where it can just happen while I can think about trying to make it better. But that is coming from like focusing on this proficiency thing of like wanting to understand this jazz language. And I don't know if that's going to be like the end all be all, like there's just so much. But now that I'm here, I really want to sort of focus I want to focus like very deeply, I would say, or like just really understand the nuances, because if I skip over like some of the details, I think the kind of sound that I want to get will just not be there. And like tracking back and like trying to find where you went wrong is like slightly an odd thing to spend your time on, rather than like taking your time right from the start, from the basics, and just really sticking to it. So I guess I am really sticking to it. I'm just shedding like 251 arpeggios and licks and shapes, like they're just arpeggio shapes in across the cage system, across the fretboard. And yeah, I do this while like watching TV, or just like sitting on, if I watch TV and sitting on the couch, and I just grab a guitar, like I have a guitar right next to the sofa for that very reason. So hitting the shed has become like very important, and I think over time the results will obviously show. So that's where like I'm getting a lot of like my fulfillment in terms of guitar playing. Like I'm really enjoying like diving deep into all of this. It is, you really do have to like want it, but also like you have to like really try to like pace yourself with it, because of course like it does get boring after like one point. But like that's the key, like not to get bored with these basics, because that is going to be the basis for your language and expression later on. So a lot is definitely happening. Like, it's just I don't also like I've barely had enough time to post on social media, and I'm booked through June. I'm playing all 4 weekends in June. I played a show last week, and I have another show coming up at the end of this month. I'm also going to be playing with Taylor Kelly, who is an incredibly amazing artist based in Philadelphia, and she has her own music. So of course like that, all of these gigs and all of these sort of material that they come with require their own level of preparation. So a lot of my time is just equally, if not like slightly even like partially focused on the material, a little bit more than like the shedding. So all of that is keeping me very busy. Like I am just almost like too busy. Also I have the day job, so both of those things, and just sort of staying in the grind of things is keeping me very busy. So Of course, there's been a lot of like gap in terms of like me making a video about anything in general, but yeah, I'll try to like make these couch and sofa chill sessions probably once a week or at least once a month. So that would be better in terms of like just sort of boiling it down to what were the most important moments and what did I sort of learn from them and what's the way forward. But yeah, that'll be it for this video. And I'm playing a lot of shows, so if you're in Philly, please check out the link that will be in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.